Hey guys, welcome to the slideshow. This is our biology slideshow named Structure Influences Function, Pollen Edition. I chose the word influences here. I could have wrote determines, but I think most of my students are really familiar with Instagram influencers, people that might influence your decisions or what you might take a look at maybe on Instagram. They have a strong influence on different people on that platform. And so I thought that would be a good word to tie here, that structure influences the function of objects and of living things. And again, this particular one is going to focus on pollen. Okay, our focus question for this particular activity is how can we use our understanding of the connection between structure and function to make biological claims or predictions? And so this earlier this week, we've been really working on trying to make a connection between how structure influences function. So now we want to use that understanding to build on top of that so that you are developing claims or predictions today. Your learning target involves you developing what we call CER, which is referred to as claim, evidence, and reasoning. And so your CER today is going to be about the method of pollination of different types of pollen. I'm going to show you some pictures taken by scanning electron microscopes. And when you're looking at them, you're going to be looking at some of those structures of the pollen to kind of come up with a claim about the method of pollination based on the characteristics you're seeing. And so that means that you're going to be basing your claims or your evidence and reasoning on your knowledge about the connection between structure and function. Okay, let's start off with some background information. A picture of a plant here. I think it's noteworthy just to bring up that while I'm talking about pollination on this slide, I do not want you to be led into a misconception by me that pollination only occurs with flowering plants. It does not. Pollination or pollen can be produced by grasses and trees too. They can produce tiny grains of pollen. But I did select a flowering plant just to kind of show some pieces. So pollination is the transfer of pollen from the male portion of the plant to the female portion of the plant. So I'm just kind of circling. This is known as the anther. This is known as the stigma. So the movement of pollen in that direction would be referred to as pollination. If you are taking notes and you need a little bit of help, if you look at the notes in editor mode on this slideshow, they are dropped down below this slide again in editor mode. Okay, so in reference to pollination, pollination can take place for obviously a few different reasons. It can be helped by animals. So animals can carry pollen from one location to another. Sometimes those animals are insects. In addition to animals, sometimes wind contributes to pollination, and the pollen can also be carried by water. For our focus today, we are not going to be talking about pollination by water, but instead we're going to make a division or a distinction between pollination that occurs by animals compared to pollination that occurs by wind. Pollination by animals is going to be referred to as zoophilous, and then we're going to use the term anemophilous to reference pollination that occurs by wind. So again, I've got these terms not only on the screen, but drop down below the slideshow if you need to check the notes, if that's helpful to you. One other piece of background information that'll probably come up here in just a few slides from here is also something called a pollen kit. So some pollen has a pollen kit. A pollen kit is basically like an oily, sticky substance on the outside of some pollen. Not all of it. All pollen has a pollen kit, but some does. Okay, so let's get into thinking about how we can use the skills that we've been developing today. So on this slide, I've got a table, and I'm wanting you to make a choice. There's different characteristics going to be listed on the left side of the table. We'll start off with the type of plant. So you've got two choices. Your first choice is trees and grasses. Your second choice is large, colorful flowers. One of those choices is going to go in each box right here. Okay, so we are not Google searching. We are not focusing on plants or pollination. It might sound like it because we're talking about pollination, but the focus again. If I go back to your target, let me go backwards quickly. our focus question, our target, are all revolving around the connection between structure and function and using that understanding to develop claims. So, and then evidence and reasoning. So, I want you to sorry, I'm going right back through what I just did a minute ago, but I'm wanting you to make claims on this slide about whether you think trees and grasses would best fit with zoophilus pollination or anemophilus pollination. Would large, colorful flowers be better associated with this form of pollination or this form of pollination? So take a moment, pause the video if you need to think about that, but make a choice between those two. The next characteristic to consider is the scent. Some plants have really strongly scented fragrances, and then some don't have quite as strong of a scent. So, do you think those strongly scented plants would have the zoophilus method of pollination or the anemophilus method of pollination? Again, pause the video if you need time to make your choices. The third characteristic is structure. If the pollen is smooth, would it be more logical that it would be carried by animals or carried by wind? If the pollen is coarse in structure, would that make it more logically carried by animals or again by wind? And then finally, pollen kit. A pollen kit is going to be a sticky, oily substance on the outside of some pollen. So it's absent in some pollen types and it's present in others. Would you expect to see an oily, sticky substance on the outside of pollen carried by animals or pollen carried by wind? So make those choices mentally and be prepared to share those with other people. We're going to move on to a piece of equipment that I want to give credit to in terms of where a lot of this information came from. So this is a scanning electron microscope. I'm actually going to need to change tabs for just a minute because I did not make note. I wanted to kind of give a reference to, here we go, scientists changing our pre-college education. Are out of the University of Toledo. They are the ones that provided the pictures that we are checking out today, which I think are really, really cool. So a scanning electron microscope allows us to see things by electrons. Our eyes view things by light. We can't see everything in the same manner that the scanning electron microscope can. So it focuses on the surface of objects, and the images are pretty cool. So we're looking at the morphology or the structure of pollen, and there's a lot of different types. And so here's some of the pictures that you could see with a scanning electron microscope. This is actually the picture of a yellow jacket eye that has mold and pollen on top of its eye. And then here's some additional pictures again that came out of the University of Toledo from their scanning electron microscope. And you can tell that these pollen pictures are very different from one another. They all have a unique structure. So let's see if you can keep your background information in mind and use the science practice skills that we've been working on developing and make some claims, evidence, and reasoning. I've got 4 pictures. They're all labeled. And so the task is the same for all 4 pictures. And following this slide, I've got an individual slide devoted to each individual picture. But I know myself as a student, it might be helpful to actually see them side by side on one slide so I can kind of compare. So let's just start off with picture number 1. Take a look at it, compare it to the others. I want you to develop a claim about the method of pollination. That claim is going to be a short, brief sentence. It could sound something like, I believe pollen shown in picture 1 is, is moved through zoophilus pollination. Or it could say something like, pollen shown in picture 1 moves through anemophilus pollination. That's it. Okay, it's just a short, sweet claim, and I've even got the two choices you're picking from. And we don't want it to be an any, mini, money, mo, just a 50-50. Instead, I want to know for sure that you didn't just 50-50 guess. I want you to provide evidence that supports the choice you made and provide reasoning that justifies the evidence and how it supports your claim. So let me give you an example. Let's say, and I'm not saying this makes sense on number one, okay? So I'm not saying this is the appropriate response, but let's say that you pick for pollen number one, let's say that you say it moves through anemophilus pollination. Let's say that the evidence you select that you say supports the claim is the structure of the pollen. Well, that's not very detailed. You'll need to go into a little bit more reasoning as to how that structure backs up the claim about whether it's carried by wind or carried by animals in zoophilus or anemophilus pollination. You'll do the same thing for picture 2, 3, and 4. And I tried to select pictures that were very different from one another so that they were not only interesting but kind of easy to compare to one another and get a good sense of the differences between these two. So if you need to slow down, obviously pause the video, but this is going to be picture number 1. Just separate it out from the slide that had all 4 together. So develop a CER of picture number 1. And you're going to do the same thing for picture 2, picture 3, and picture 4. Going to take us all the way back to slide number 2 so that you can do a quick self-assessment after you have developed your CERs or while you are. And did you keep the focus question in mind? Have you met the target? It's really important that you continuously go back and self-assess self-assess how your progress against the target. And like I've talked to you before, if your progress is not in a visible format for me to see, then I don't have any evidence of your learning. So make sure your evidence of understanding is visible to me. This video was made with you in mind, so I hope it's been helpful to you, interesting way for us to tie some of our skills together.